Russia's top spy is on the U.S. sanctions list. He isn't allowed to be in the United States without special permission. He's listed on the... So why was he here meeting with U.S. government officials? Well, according to the Washington Post, two top Russian spy chiefs traveled to Washington last week to discuss counterterrorism issues with CIA Director Mike Pompeo. But the unusual visit also raised concerns among some U.S. officials that Moscow could interpret the encounter as a sign the Trump administration is willing to move beyond the issue of election interference. Chuck Schumer has his own concerns about the visit. He's demanding answers.
This is a serious national security issue. Russia hacked our elections. We sanctioned the head of their foreign intelligence, and then the Trump administration invites him to waltz through our front door. This is an extreme dereliction of duty by President Trump, who seems more intent on undermining the rule of law in this country than standing up to Putin.
And if you listen to the Russians, no biggie. Here's how the Russian ambassador to the U.S. explained it in state media. Quote, contacts between special services continued even at the most difficult times. Politics will be politics, but everyday work will be everyday work. There are political slogans, but there is also some real work to do. The panel's still here. John Heilemann, I mean, the real work of the Russian spy agency was to meddle with our politics.
Yes.
So why are we meeting with them? Can't we coordinate our Syrian air strategy over the phone?
Yes, we could.
And is it a coincidence that we're not going to enforce our sanctions?
No, it's certainly not. That's certainly not a coincidence. I mean, look, it's the evidence. I mean, we went through this thing yesterday where we talked about all of the various connections between the various nefarious, ugly-looking, incriminating connections between Trump and Russia over the course of the last 2 years that are just facts, not conspiracy theories, not part of some dossier. And this week, almost forgotten in all of this other stuff that's happened, including the State of the Union, is the fact that we're not going to enforce those Russian sanctions, which is an extraordinary thing. Right. It's just an extraordinary thing. And now this. I have no theory about what this is about. I have no idea. But it is so much part, as humans, we do pattern recognition. It is so much consistent with the large pattern of the odd, disturbing, cozying up to Russia that has happened from the moment Donald Trump stood on the national stage all the way up to this very day as he sits there in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, my 6-year-old does patterns, apple, apple, banana, apple. This is like love, 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 Vladimir Putin. I mean, and let me just say, in disclosure, my husband works in sanctions as they pertain to Iran. This is not a president who doesn't believe in economic sanctions for our enemies. He doesn't believe Russia is an enemy.
You literally have Mike Pompeo telling the BBC on Monday, Russia intends to affect the midterm elections. He said this to the BBC, and now he's letting the spies. Look, if this were a bad action movie, I would have left the theater by now. You would think they're sticking jump drives in his laptop whenever he goes to the bathroom. Because if you let the spy agency in that is directly responsible for affecting our elections on the same day that the president says, I'm not going to put through the sanctions that my own Republican-led Senate voted for, clearly we've just handed away our power. We have handed away our sovereignty. Well, it's ridiculous.
Let me ask you a question, Charlie Sykes, because we talk about the Mueller investigation as though it has now been reduced to an obstruction of justice investigation. But we also wonder aloud whether the obstruction of justice is ongoing. Might the collusion also be ongoing?
Well, we know that the attack is ongoing, and that's the thing that's most remarkable about it. We know that the Russians are attacking our democracy. So the CIA director says...
Don't believe you. I think we have Pompeo saying that. Well, let's watch Pompeo. He thinks so, too.
This threat's not going to go away. The Russians have been at this a long time, and I fully expect they'll continue to be at it.
Do you have concerns that they might try and interfere in the U.S. midterms, which are coming up?
Of course. I have every expectation that they will continue to try and do that, but I'm confident that America will be able to have a free and fair election that will push back in a way that is sufficiently robust that the impact they have on our election won't be great.
Okay, now what's extraordinary about that is that in explaining why they did not impose the sanctions earlier this week, the administration said that the law, just passing the law, was already having a deterrent effect. Well, then you have the CIA director saying that apparently they have not been deterred from continuing to attack our democratic process. So clearly, it is not having the effect of at least protecting. And again, you step back from all this Mueller investigation. The bottom line is that should this be a partisan issue? The President of the United States, the #1 responsibility is to protect the national security of this country. We are under attack from the Russians, and this administration at every single turn downplays it, minimizes it, and lies about what's been going on.
At what point, Zerlina, do we stop pretending that there's a question about Donald Trump's affinity for Putin? And at what point do we really just
Stopped that about a year ago.
I stopped that.
Are we
I stopped
done?
doing that.
I mean, but seriously, why do we have to act like there's something we don't know? I mean,
Right.
we know that Donald Trump has harsher things to say about Jeff Sessions than Vladimir Putin.
Right.
We know that Donald Trump has used that rose garden to lash out at people in his own cabinet more often than he has ever lashed out at a foreign adversary. We know that he's for sanctions because he's really for re-upping them against Iran, where there's really open question about whether or not they're complying with the nuclear. So he's not anti-sanction. He's anti-sanctions against Russia.
Right.
We know why, right?
Absolutely, we know why. I mean, like John, I have not been asking those questions all year. I think I'm waiting for more facts. I take the new facts and I place them up against all of the facts that we know. So every single time there's a new revelation about Russia, it sometimes, as a regular human, hard to keep up. But somebody like us, we're nerds. We're dissecting all of it. And so when you learn new information, it's really important to look back at what we already knew. And every single time you learn something new about a new meeting with a Russian, a new contact with a Russian, you put that up against what was happening at the time in the campaign, and it looks even more suspicious than it would have already if the meeting was independent of anything else going on. And so I think that there's something there. Donald Trump is clearly trying to cover up something.
Yes.
I think anybody who
Otherwise,
says
why do you
that that's
lie?
not the
Right.
case
This is
would
the
be
que-
lying.
Go ahead.
This is
Last
still the
word,
question. The
Heilemann.
question still continues to be why.
Yeah.
That is
Right.
the, we
Right.
don't know
Right.
the
We don't
answer.
know
Why did Mike
We
Flynn
don't.
lie?
We
Why
don't.
does
We
he-
do. We
right.
know that Trump has had this affinity for Putin and has wanted to be soft and best buddies with Putin and has wanted to be soft with the Soviet Union throughout. The question of why, there's obviously some evidence that's been adduced that he was trying to do business in Moscow for many, many years, that he had economic interest there that he was trying to exploit before he ran for president, and maybe still. That's one thing. There's also the possibility suggested by the dossier and other things that the Russians have compromise on him, compromising material that they're holding over him through an implicit or explicit threat of blackmail. But those are still questions. We don't know why, but we know what.
Yeah. Right. Okay, that's a perfect segue to last night's State of the Union, where there was teeny tiny mention of Russia. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break.